You're going to be
Technical.
recorded. We should always make light. I
Okay.
think that's a very, very good thing to do. Yeah. Computer. Okay. And share screen. And bing. Okay, you're on.
Well, welcome everybody, and I do mean everybody. It will be a miracle if you actually find us in real time, because for the last half hour we've been exploring the wonders of Zoom technology. Anyway, welcome to an altogether too brief introduction to backyard foraging. I note, looking out the window, that it is a very beautiful day, so if you're not with us live, hopefully you are enjoying the beautiful day. So let us begin. Once upon a time, before there were supermarkets, even before there were farms, there were hunter-gatherers. And I want to note for a lot of our colleagues who happen to be vegan, we're going to be focusing on the gathering today rather than the hunting. So I'd like to introduce you to our modern day forager. You may recognize him from earlier videos this Earth Week. This is Esben Chow, our master worm composter. I'd like you to take some time to read this quote while I explain a little about where it's from. Samuel Thayer is one of America's leading foraging experts, and I've had the pleasure of reading 3 of his books and exploring numerous videos. Sam is somebody who grew up fascinated by the natural world around him, and I think this quote surely captures what we're all fascinated by about our relationship with the earth. And I thought it was particularly relevant for this occasion of Earth Week. There are many reasons why people forage, and again, this is a long list. I think one or more of these might appeal to you. I also want to note that you don't need to wear a mask, and you don't need to walk in certain lines, and there's no way to checking out for foraging, but there are great opportunities to explore nature while getting exercise and finding free organic food that often tastes delicious. So you may not know this, but wild food is all around us. And these are some pictures just in Fairfield, but wild food grows everywhere in open fields where it's sunny, woodlands where it's shady, along the roadsides, and along freshwater riverbanks and lakesides, as well as saltwater, the seashore and coastal areas. So different plants obviously grow in different areas, but we thought, just for convenience sake, that we would start right in our own backyard. Hence this photo of Master Esben. So before we begin, I wanted to issue some standard caveats about foraging. And the first and most important for children who are watching, that you should always be supervised by an adult. That's because of the second bullet. You need to be absolutely 100% certain of plant identification before eating any wild food. You also need to be aware of what part or parts of the plant are edible. Sometimes one part is good and the other part is not good, either tasting or good for you. Sometimes a plant can be eaten raw, other times it has to be cooked. And if you've never tried a wild food before, you should always sample a very small portion first to make sure it agrees with you. Sometimes you could get an upset tummy, even if the food is perfectly safe to eat. And just a general word of advice, you should avoid areas that have been sprayed by pesticides or chemicals, which includes a lot of our roadsides, but it could include your backyard, which would make this whole presentation somewhat short for you. But anyway, next set of warnings, just things you need to be aware of as you're walking around. You should wear long pants and sleeves to avoid potential bites from ticks, bugs, or scratches from thorns. Obviously, if it's sunny, you want to be smart and put on some sunscreen, maybe wear a hat. And last but not least, one of the most important tips is to learn to identify poison ivy, which often grows right alongside many fantastic wild edibles. Poison ivy has 3 leaves, and for most people, they can get an allergic rash from touching not only the leaves but also the vines of it. So you need to be very careful as you're exploring in your backyard or even beyond the backyard. The subject of plant identification could fill a college course, so we're not going to go too deeply into it, but the resource books that I will provide information on later on have a lot more information about this, but you need to be aware of habitats. Certain plants will grow in one place, but not others. Also, seasonality is important. Unlike the supermarket, where they can obtain food from anywhere in the world, wild food grows when it's ready to grow. So some plants that are available in the spring may not be around later in the year. Some that are growing in the spring may be unpalatable later in the year. They get too bitter or other problems. So you'll need to learn to identify the various parts of a plant, including the flower and fruiting parts, the leaf patterns and shapes, even the stem and branching characteristics, as well as the type of root or what other system grows underground. So now we're going to look at a few common plants that grow in many backyards. You might have one or more of them in your yard, and there might even be other edible treats that we don't cover here. I've listed some, one of which I've noticed practically in every yard as I walk around Fairfield during this coronavirus, which is the hairy bittercress. Despite its name, it actually can be edible if you find the young leaves to it. So let us begin with what is perhaps the most readily identifiable flower in this presentation, and perhaps anywhere, which is the dandelion. Everybody recognizes the yellow flowers. This particular dandelion in the picture, you cannot see its flower, but they do shoot up. And I noticed in my yard today, I've got many yellow flowers showing. And one thing outside this presentation that's important to note is that because they appear early in spring, they're one of the best pollinator plants around. So rather than pulling them out, as most people have done throughout the ages, you can leave them to help feed the bees. And one other interesting fact about dandelions is there are so many different parts of the plant that are edible. I particularly enjoy the leaves, which have teeth on them. And for those interested in the derivation of the name dandelion, it actually comes from the French words, which is dents de lion, which means the teeth of a lion. And these are very delicious salad ingredients. They can either be eaten raw or cooked. You can see them in the supermarket. So some of these are actually sold for top dollar at your local supermarket. But there are other parts. The crown, which is right near the base, the yellow flower, as well as the root, which grows underground. I have not tried all of these, but the literature says that they are all edible in one way, shape, or form. Our next plant is called chickweed, and it took me years to find chickweed, but suddenly I find it almost everywhere. And this is a low-growing plant. Many people think this tastes a little like corn or corn silk, but you chop it into 1-inch pieces, and it can be added to a salad, and it can also be cooked. But it's a delicious plant that appears mostly in the cool weather, so it's out there now and will be around for a while. Here's another easily identifiable flower. We know this from the children's poem about roses are red, violets are blue. In my yard, the flowers tend to be white or purple or some combination, but the violet has heart-shaped leaves. They don't have any scent, and unlike a lot of the wild foods we're going to be talking about, these are very mild and neutral tasting. And so one thing I would suggest for a lot of these wild edibles is to tear them into pieces, mix them in with other greens, whether you've grown it in your own garden or purchase it at the store. You're essentially creating a more deluxe mesclun salad mix. Even the flowers are edible, and they taste like candy, as Mr. Esben is discovering here. This one is a little controversial because it's a terribly invasive plant. And once I discovered garlic mustard, I realized that this too is growing just about everywhere. So in your own backyard, you might want to do everyone a little bit of a service and just pull some out and let them die so they don't take over. These plants have certain characteristics that they can crowd out other native species. So it's good that they don't proliferate too much, but the leaves and the stems or stalks are both edible. I use the leaves in salad, and you can cook the stalks. It's reputed to be similar to broccoli rabe, although not quite as meaty as the stalks of that vegetable. Lamb's quarters are often sold in some upscale markets as wild spinach, and this was another one that appeared once I started to look for it. And sometimes they can be very small, depending on the quality of the soil they're in, but in better soil, it can grow 3 to 5 feet or even taller. The leaves are both edible as a salad ingredient raw or cooked like spinach. I will caution that if you're planning to cook it, you need to pull a lot of leaves. The leaves can be small, and you probably need about 10 cups of leaves to generate 1 cup of cooked lamb's quarters. The seed clusters, which appear at the end of the season, can also be dried, and after some treatment, you can use them to add to baked goods or cereals similar to quinoa. This is another favorite of kids. It looks a little bit like 4-leaf clover, except if you're paying attention, it's 3-leaf clover. They're heart-shaped leaves, and they have yellow 5-petaled flowers typically. And what's interesting about this, which is common to many plants in the sorrel family, is that they are very lemony. So kids will be surprised when they put a green clover-like leaf into their mouth and it tastes like lemon candy. So it's delicious again as an accent in your salads. This, the field garlic I've lumped in together with wild onions because you probably have different varieties growing in your yard. They stand out because they're much taller than the average grass. My wife compares it to a teenage boy who's just starting to shave and has little patches here and there. But you can tell these plants apart from other non-edible plants such as the Star of Bethlehem, which you shouldn't eat because it has toxic qualities. But the edible garlic and onions are all tubular and hollow, as opposed to flat like grasses and other plants. And when you break it, it will smell like an onion. If it smells like an onion, it's in the onion family, which includes garlic. And you can use them just like you would chives or scallions. And you can also use the underground bulbs, just like you would commercial garlic. Just be aware that they're going to be a lot smaller than what you find in the store, but they are just as edible and tasty. So there are some rules of sustainability that you need to follow to forage responsibly. If it's your backyard, you don't need to ask permission except to mom and dad, who should accompany you. But if you're on private land, you should always ask permission. And if you're in public space, be aware that there are rules sometimes that prohibit the taking of any plants. Another important thing to remember is that you need to harvest judiciously. Make sure you pick where the plants are abundant and they can easily regrow. You always want to leave a healthy population, not only for other foragers, but for animals who might rely on this for their food supply. You want to collect food in a way that does the least damage to the plant and its surrounding environment. And remember that other wildlife besides humans may rely on certain wild food for survival. So what follows is going to be some information that if you're interested in the subject, you can learn a whole lot more than I could possibly cover in this brief presentation. And why don't we start with some foraging books? Oh, why don't we start with some foraging tours? These are two tour guides that I have personally attended their tours. The first is Hayden Stebbins, who is a Fairfield native, now living in New York, I believe, but he does give guided tours throughout the year. You can check out his schedule for tour dates and other information at haydensharvest.com. And the second is the celebrated wild man, Steve Brill, who is based in Westchester, New York. And Steve came into prominence when he was arrested for eating a dandelion in Central Park, which happened to land him on the David Letterman show. But the charges were dismissed, and Steve has gone on to write books and give tours for many, many decades. And he's quite the comedian at that. His website is wildmanstevebrill.com. He gives tours both in New York and Connecticut throughout the season. So check out his calendar for those events. Now we come to the books. I've already mentioned a few of these authors, including Sam Thayer and Steve Brill, but there are many books, and this is just a representative sampling of them. Many people are familiar with Ewell Gibbons, who was one of the first writers to really popularize foraging in, I believe it was late 50s, early 60s. But this subject has been around for a long time. And as I mentioned, going back to time immemorial, people have been doing this. You often hear about the grandmothers in Europe would take their grandchildren out with them to pick plants for the dinner, whether it's for a salad or a vegetable to cook. And I had the pleasure of accompanying friends in the mountains of Italy, and every time we went out, we would find something that would wind up on the dinner table. So these are great informative books that cover everything you want to know about foraging in much greater detail than we could here today, and they're all highly recommended. And Hayden Stebbins also recommended to me a number of botany books, because if you want to become a real expert in identifying plants, you need to learn a lot about botany. And these are not too weighted down, but there's a lot of information in there that can help you take your foraging to another level. There are also many websites out there, including YouTube, where you can watch videos on a particular plant if you're interested in that. I can't tell you how many episodes of eattheweeds.com with Green Dean that I've watched, and it helps to see them, in real life, to see what plants look like. Oftentimes, plants that you see will look different from the pictures in the books, and you need to understand that there are variations depending on many different factors. But there's a lot of great information on these sites to help you identify plants and then learn what to do with them once you've found them, how to prepare them. Honest-food.net is one of the good ones
Wow.
from the author Hank Shaw. So I want to thank you, and I can't tell if there are any questions yet, but I want to acknowledge our backyard forager, as I mentioned, was Esben Chow, who is a neighbor and the son of my colleague, Kirsten Chow, who took these wonderful photographs of the backyard forager. Also wanted to acknowledge my personal mentors, including J.D. Martignon, Steve Brill, and Hayden Stebbins, as well as all the authors referenced in the presentation. So I cannot tell, Mary, if there are any questions.
No. Oh, sorry.
It does not appear to be any, but
No questions. I did want to mention, though, I called this up when my kids were young. There's a book that we used to read called Winnie the Pooh, Half a Acorn Pie. Does that ring a bell to you?
no, I don't think I've seen that one. Why don't you tell us a little more about it?
So I'm reading the description. It says, after Piglet's friends pick all of the acorns in the 100-acre woods as a surprise for him, Piglet decides to plant one for each one he eats, so there will always be more. So that sort of goes to what you were saying about don't take everything that's there. You want to make sure that there's plenty left so that there's more for next year and all the succeeding years. So if you're a parent and you want to kind of have a story to tell that the kids can relate to, that's a good book to kind of get the idea home.
Yeah, and one of the inspirations for this presentation was the circumstances that we're all confronted with. We're all a little bit housebound, but this is an opportunity to get out, get some fresh air, and learn about the nature that is all around you in your backyard. And every night I've been going out and clipping some leaves and some onion from the backyard and adding it to the salad, and it's really tasty, and it's a fun activity out there.
We do have a question. It's actually from our very own backyard forager. Esben wants to know if you'll lead a foraging walk when the quarantine is over.
Well, that's certainly food for thought.
Aw.
You can tell I've been hanging out with my friend Larry Cayley too much. Or maybe that's also Steve Brill's sense of humor. I think we could do that. I just wanted to note that unlike the people that I've been referencing who are very studied in this, I am my expertise is somewhat limited, but I'd be happy to lead such a tour around my backyard, or if we can find some other place where we're allowed to go once it's safe to gather together.
Well, it certainly does encourage people to not use pesticides on their property so that they could go foraging safely and eat what they forage.
And why else is that using pesticides not a great idea, Mary?
Well, pesticides are poisons, so you don't want to be walking through poisonous plants no matter what, whether you're foraging them or not.
And what happens to pesticides when it rains?
Well, it gets washed away and goes into the waterways, and even when it doesn't get washed away, our poor pollinators get to when they're trying to eat the nectar and the pollen, they're eating those pesticides as well.
Yeah,
So
a lot of toxicity for animals and insects and aquatic life. So there are many reasons why you might want to rethink using chemical pesticides. There are organic treatments that you can use to accomplish the same goals that are much friendlier all around.
So I would like to say Bob and I have this back and forth about the garlic mustard. He thinks it's great. I don't. Garlic mustard is allelopathic, which means that it puts out toxins to other plants. So please do your other plants a favor and forage for garlic mustard and make your other plants very happy. If you notice, when you have a patch of garlic mustard, all you have is a patch of garlic mustard. Nothing else will go around it. So, especially if it's garlic mustard growing up against trees and so forth, it's actually creating a toxic patch of soil around your tree base. So, feel free to pull those babies right out.
And some of our open spaces actually have days dedicated for the community to help out and pull invasive plants such as garlic mustard so it doesn't take over and crowd out the other beautiful native plants.
Yeah, several invasive plants are allelopathic, so like winged euonymus, garlic mustard, and so forth. Um, so this was really interesting. And Hayden does come back to Fairfield a lot. His parents are still here. Charlie did a couple of webinars with us, and he's been doing a lot of work clearing up Connecticut Audubon spaces. So Hayden comes back and he's helping us with pollinator pathway projects here in Fairfield. So maybe we could do a Hayden and Bob tour. That would be fun.
Yeah, great idea.
So we'll see.
Hayden is also interested in the medicinal qualities of plants, which we didn't touch upon here. That's way beyond my level of expertise, but Hayden knows an awful lot about plants and their uses and all types of medical conditions, skin conditions, and so forth.
Yeah, he talked a lot about that, a lot about herbs, and he's actually working very closely with Sephra Alexandra, who is spearheading that eco type project for the pollinator pathway program. So if you can catch that webinar, you can hear more about that. So all these interconnections.
Yes. So thank you, Esben and Kirsten, for tuning in. Anyone else who watches, it's been a pleasure sharing some information, and we hope this whets your appetite and lets you go out and explore nature in your own backyard and beyond.
Thank you, Bob.
Thank you, Mary.
Toodles.